at the Mount Olivet Cemetary. We have Showman's Rest. Could you talk a little bit about how all of that got started?
Sure. We had a gentleman that worked for us, and he was just a drifter that came on as a teenager and ended up spending his whole life with us. His name was John Carroll, and he worked with the animals, and especially back in the old days, some of the guys that would come along, they were drifters and didn't really have family connections, and so the circus kind of ended up being their family and their home, and they spent their lives here. So John Carroll was one of those characters, and he had lost his eye in an accident, and he received an insurance settlement. I think it was $17,000 or something, and he didn't have a family, so about 5 or 6 years later, he passed away, and unbeknownst to my father, he had left this insurance settlement to my father, and so my dad didn't know what to do with it, and about that same time, my uncle passed away, and that was in 1960, and so he got the idea of making this place where circus people would be buried, and it would be someplace, because a lot of times circus people, like I say, don't have roots, and they would be buried in Timbuktu, and nobody'd ever know who they were or know this rich history that they had or anything about them. So he thought it would be cool to have this area where circus people could be buried, and that there would always be somebody that would come and visit, that would be able to tell stories about that person or have a connection to their family, or it was just going to be a place where they wouldn't be forgotten. So when my uncle died, he took this John Carroll money, and he purchased this area at Mount Olivet, and he named it Showman's Rest. My uncle was the first person buried there, and so my father buried John Carroll there. He has one of the biggest headstones out there. I don't know if you've been there or not, but his is quite large. And then my father had what was left. He put it in he invested it, and so that it would always be earning money, and he had it fixed so that if somebody died in circus business and wanted to be buried there, if they didn't have the means or the family, that John Carroll's fund would supply the plot and put a small marker. And if you'll notice when you're at the cemetery, there'll be some small markers that say donated by the John Carroll Fund. And so it's worked quite well. We're almost full. We only have just a few plots left, and we're trying to figure out how we can expand. But that was the basis of it, of how it got started. It was an inheritance from one of our workers that didn't have family and left the money to my father, and my father had this vision of a place that would be like it is today. And so it's really become a landmark in Hugo, and I'm always amazed. I go out to change the flowers on my parents' and my grandfather and step-grandmother's graves 4 times a year or something, and I'm always amazed when I'm there that it never fails that at least one group will stop by, maybe just a couple, or maybe a bus tour will stop by to be looking at this particular part of this community cemetery. So it has gotten quite a bit of notoriety around at least the state, and it was in Southern Living magazine one time, and it's gotten some national publicity. So it's kind of a tourist place in Hugo, and you always feel kind of silly asking people, well, you've been to the library, you've been to the museum, you've been here, you've been there, have you been to the cemetery yet? And they kind of give you a funny look, but it's a really neat place, and it I don't know, it kind of gives you a sense of well-being when you're there to know that these people will never be forgotten.
And a lot of people who are buried there have been so closely tied to the circuses in Hugo, and not only just Hugo.
Oh, absolutely. The majority are, there's our circus mechanic, and there's our trapeze star, and there's, just all these different people there that have lived in Hugo and are known in the community, but there's also people buried there that just wanted to be where other circus people are buried, which, it's it may sound corny, but that was their desire. So there are people there from California, There's a young man that was killed in a train accident with Ringling Brothers who never worked for our circuses in Hugo or never lived in Hugo, but he wanted to be buried there. And so there are a number of people there that really have requested to come from many different parts of the United States to be buried there.